This right here is where it all started for me. Back in October of 2013, I built myself a PC for the first time, featuring an FX-8350. This, in fact, is the exact CPU that I bought 10 years ago, and in today's video, we are revisiting it. This thing released back in 2012, it has 8 piledriver cores, and yes, it does actually have 8 physical cores, though despite having a higher core count, it was in most cases delivering worse performance than the 4-core 8-thread 3770K in productivity tasks due to the unconventional design. Thankfully, it didn't compete with the i7. The FX-8350 had an MSRP of $195, the same price as locked 3rd-gen i5s were being sold at. Nowadays, the cheapest FX-8350 costs $80, which is quite expensive. I have absolutely no idea why would anyone buy it at this price when you can get something like a 2700X or a 3600 instead. Anyways, for the specs we have a 990 FXA UD3 motherboard, a Dark Freezer X128 cooler, 16GB of DDR3 memory, an RX 6600 XT GPU, and a 700-watt power supply. Since this is quite an old processor, it shouldn't be a surprise that it doesn't perform all that well at stock, so we're mainly going to focus on overclocking results. I was able to push this thing to 4.7 GHz on all cores using 1.525 volts. Yep, you heard that right, I probably have the worst overclocking FX-8350 on planet Earth. For the North Bridge and Hyper Transport we have 2400 MHz, while for the memory we have 2034 megatransfers, and keep in mind that this is the maximum overclock I was able to achieve out of this system. Finally, I'm using Radeon's Instant Replay feature to record the gameplay, and depending on the game, it might result in a lower frame rate, as you can see in these examples. So if you're not going to be recording, you're going to get an even higher frame rate. Alright, first up we have Forza Horizon 5, where our overclocked FX-8350 is capable of delivering a playable frame rate, both at low and high settings. I didn't test this game at stock, though I'm confident that it won't have any issues there either, since with an overclock the game is more than playable. Dying Light 2 also runs pretty good with the CPU. We do get drops below 50 FPS every now and then, though for the most part the game is quite playable, both at low and high settings. Next, we have Cyberpunk, where our processor does fine in remote areas, yet once we reach CPU demanding locations, the frame rate begins to drop to low 30s and the frame time becomes very unstable. When it comes to the high preset, it is usable, though it does result in a slightly lower frame rate. Overclocking does boost performance noticeably compared to stock, making the game quite a bit more playable, especially in demanding areas.
Investigate your gas. Se recomienda a quienes padezcan problemas respiratorios que se queden en casa.
Moving on, we have Apex Legends, which is perfectly playable regardless of which settings we use. The frame rate can drop below 70s in some situations, though for the most part it stays well above 80 FPS. Once again, we're also getting a decent boost in performance compared to stock, though it's not as impressive as what we got from the i7-960 that I reviewed in my previous video, which you can watch up here. Next, we have Warzone 2, which doesn't run all that well on our 11-year-old CPU. I remember thinking that the first Warzone wasn't playable on the FX-8350 when that came out, cause it would drop to 45 FPS every now and then, while here the frame rate doesn't even reach 45 FPS, which is simply not enough in a competitive game like this one. Man Remastered doesn't run too bad with the CPU using low settings. The frame rate can drop down to 30s in demanding locations, though for the most part it stays in the range of 40 to 55 frames per second. Increasing the settings does heavily impact performance, so it's best to stick to lowest possible settings in this title. For our final game, we have Hogwarts Legacy, and while you can play the game using the lowest preset, it doesn't run all that great, specifically in detailed areas like Hogsmeade. Using the high preset results in a noticeable performance drop, so I'd probably stick to the lowest preset in this title for the best experience. When it comes to temps, with a 4.7 GHz overclock, our processor never exceeds 60 degrees Celsius in a 21-degree room using Intel burn test, and while gaming, I don't think I ever saw it go beyond 50 degrees. Now, I believe these are socket temps because they're not too far ahead the temperature that I get when measuring right behind the socket. Whatever it is, I do know for a fact that this CPU starts throttling only when these temps reach 80 degrees, rather than 61 degrees like many believe it to be, so we still have plenty of temperature headroom even with a 4.7 GHz overclock. Finally, we have power consumption, and this thing can peak at about 500 watts while gaming, so you want to have at least a 650 watt power supply if you're thinking of pushing this thing to its limits. And there you have it. This is how an FX-8350 performs nowadays. Using this thing once again brought some memories. Like I said, I used it for about 7 years, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, then you should know that despite the weaknesses that it had, I believe that it also had a few strong points to it compared to the competition that not a lot of people would talk about. Over the years, I uploaded quite a few FX-related videos as well as comparisons where I demonstrated that. In fact, I even had a little beef with Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed because of this, all of which you can watch over here if you're interested. Long story short, I still don't think that the FX lineup in general deserved the amount of hate that it got. Anyways, if you'd like to watch more CPU revisits, feel free to check them out over here, and if you're curious what would happen if an FX-8350 released at the same time as the first generation i7-960, let me know in the comment section down below and I might compare them in the next video. Either way, that's been it. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content, and I'll see y'all in the next one.